Okay, good day, year 12. I'm saying day optimistically, but this could be morning, afternoon, evening. But at some point, you are going to have to come and learn online with me and with us for this week and possibly for the next few weeks. So, we want to set up some really good practices. As you'll see, each video lesson will take us through a series of steps and activities. There will also be some quizzes going on the Show My Homework quiz page, just some ways to check in with low stakes quizzing, low stakes knowledge, as well as the lesson content as I'm going to talk you through each day. So it's really important that you're paying attention, that you're actively listening, making notes, responding at the given time, okay? But the beauty of these lessons is that they will be here and they will never disappear from YouTube for the foreseeable future. So you can return to these lessons, you can manage your time. Okay, so we have been covering the topic this term of social diversity. We've introduced the first level of procedural knowledge. We've done an evaluative essay. And last time we were together in person, we're beginning to look at how we turn that knowledge, what we know about theories, ideas, and concepts into another written outcome, into another written task. And the task that we are looking at is the analysis, the writer's perspectives. Now, it makes it really clear here that this is a section B task. It says language discourses, answer both question 3 and 4. So, guys, I'm going to very quickly remind you of the content you need. So I'm going to very quickly go through the next series of slides because we've done all this, but I just want to make sure that we've got the right context, the right information in front of us. So in order to prepare to do an analysis question on writers' perspectives, we have looked together at 2 texts. We did a shared, really detailed analysis and guided reading of text A from BBC Worklife. So we have done an awful lot of this already. So this is all in our notes. So as we start to do the written outcomes today and this week, you need to make sure that you are using these notes, that you are referring back to the notes and the ideas that we did do together. If you try and come at this activity without using that lesson kind of work and input that we've already done, I would call you a fool. The reason we spent so much time preparing this first text is to give us the content and the ideas. So we know we spent many lessons reading this in a lot of detail and really unpacking what the writer's perspective, their point of view was regarding accents, how they are presenting those ideas. We then introduced a second text, okay? Now the second text, no apology here, we looked at in a very superficial way together. The emphasis being that it was to encourage you to read and begin to create autonomy with your own reading skills with text B. So again, as we move forward, there's going to be a greater need for you to return to text B and to apply some of those skills of labeling and analysis that we did together for text A. And if you find it harder to write about text B, that's going to be natural because we've not looked at it in the same way as text A. However, we have introduced 2 texts, the BBC Worklife article and the Telegraph article. So those are our 2 texts that we are going to be using to create our written response. Okay, so you might want to pause here. You might want to get your 2 texts. You want to make sure that you've got your notes to hand because it's going to make it easier when we move into some of our shared ideas about writing and turning ideas into paragraphs and into an outcome together. So far, so good. Yep, happy? Lovely. So we then looked at text 2 and we began to do the comparison work in class. So really the focus for us this week is going to be on guided writing, working together to turn that knowledge, that analytical set of ideas and notes into a written response that qualifies us to have a written version of a question 3. Okay, so we're just going to pause at this point and look at the question here. So text A printed is a feature article about social accents from the BBC Online. Check, you've got that one, you've got your notes and your annotations. Text B printed is the start of a feature article about social accents from the Telegraph. Check, we've got that one. So we've got both sets of information. Excellent. It then says analyze how language is used in text A and B to present views about social language. In your answer, you should examine any similarities and differences, and explore how effectively the text present their views. Now, it looks a little bit with the blue text boxes. What I've tried to do here is to adapt an existing question to the text that we've been looking at. So the bits I've added in, social accents from the BBC Online, social accents from the Telegraph, social language in blue, are really the elements that always change in section B, question 3. Everything else, text A, text B, analyze how language is used, remains the same. So one of the benefits of this question is if you learn the structure, you learn what it means to meet the structure and the mark scheme, you cannot be surprised. Okay, I do like the A-level language paper for that. If you really get to know the layout of the paper, you get to understand what each question is asking you to do and what the mark scheme looks like, it cannot surprise you. It doesn't mean it can't be challenging. It doesn't mean there can't be years where they give you really not very nice texts, but it won't surprise you in terms of its layout and what you're being asked to do. Okay, so that's really what we're going to be looking at today, is how do we take our notes and annotations into a written analysis? How do we begin to analyze how language is used in text A and text B? Now, we had a lesson when we were last together in person, just unpacking this idea of perspective. So this is here to remind you of some of the language we're going to be using in our response. And we began to plan. But you've listened to me for long enough. So I'm just going to introduce a little linguistic warm-up for us. Okay, so in a minute, you're going to pause. You can give yourself as long as you need. Ideally, I would try and do this for maybe 5 minutes. You don't want to be spending longer than that, really. But this is about securing your knowledge, your ability to label and analyze text. So if it takes you a little bit longer because you're using your notes, you're getting it right, nobody needs to know how long this lesson takes you at home, okay? But we would say maybe within the classroom, I'd be giving you about 5 minutes. So it's a little linguistic warm-up for us. And it says we've got the endings here, guys, of our two texts. So on one side, we've got the ending from the BBC Work Life article that begins, but practically speaking. On the other side, we've got the ending from the Telegraph article, don't let accents continue to be one of the last acceptable prejudices. So it says here, for the elements highlighted in yellow, can you label the sentence function? Can you use the elements labelled in yellow to determine whether we're looking at interrogatives, declaratives, exclamatories, and imperatives? So in a minute, when I press pause, that's what you're going to determine and decide. The yellow bits, what would you say they are in terms of their sentence function? Okay, now it says for the elements in green, can you label the word classes? But can you also explain the link across the two ideas? So we've got a green element highlighted from both texts. So you look at them separately and think about the word classes, and then you create a link. Now your link can be linguistic at a language level, or it can be at the level of meaning and ideas for AO3. Finally, then, it says for the elements in blue, explain the final image, including labeling, we're presented with. So this is a bit like a safety net, a safety card. Whenever we're analysing two texts, it's always good to look at the very final sentence. What is the final image, the final idea, the final perspective we are being offered? Okay, so I'm going to say press pause at this stage. Give yourself as long as you need to work through the three elements, but we will go through the answers together shortly. Okay, so just press play when you're ready. Okay, so I'm imagining you've been working on this for 5 minutes. Now, at this stage, then, you can give yourself a tick if it's right. If I'm giving you an answer and you got it wrong, don't just say wrong, unpack where you went wrong so that you understand the elements then that maybe you need to revise or to be sure of. Now, guys, sentence function is different to sentence type. Sentence function, interrogative, declarative, exclamatory, and imperative really brings us in at the C grade part of the mark scheme. And we do know that there is higher value in labeling sentence types, so whether it's complex, simple, or compound. But we always want a secure foundation. And sentence function, you've got a 1 in 4 chance of getting it right if you're about the odds, but it's sometimes easier, okay, and less daunting to secure your ability to look at function and then build up to sentence type. Now, at this point, if you want to go back to these sentences and look at the sentence type, that in itself is never going to be a waste. Okay, and I might just draw attention to some of those elements as we're looking. So for the elements highlighted in yellow, label the sentence function. Okay, so let's start with this first one. But practically speaking, if you look the part and find it necessary and productive to lose a stigmatized accent, it's possible to do successfully on an individual level. So guys, sentence functioning, we look at the end punctuation marks. I've got my full stop, and then we look at the beginning. But practically speaking, now if we're talking about a full stop, it cannot be interrogative. Why not? Good, because it's not got a question mark. It cannot be exclamatory. Why not? Brilliant, it doesn't have an exclamation mark. So we're now down to two choices, declarative or imperative. Now, the imperative, the command, the sentence function that offers the command has to begin with a verb. Okay, so when we look at the beginning of that sentence, but practically speaking, we've got a coordinating conjunction, but actually being used in a non-standard way at the start of a sentence. We've got the adverbial, practically speaking. So we are not looking at an imperative, but we've got an opening declarative. Brilliant. Let's look at this next bit then. Many people have, but at what cost? So guys, we can go straight to the highlighted question mark. So we are looking at an interrogative. Okay, now there are other sentences in this example, but I just want to show how actually you can secure AO1 marks by looking for patterns. So then the last bit I highlighted for us just at this stage, in the long run prospects, we've got another interrogative, we've got another question. So we could argue, we could summarize that towards the end of this article, the writer is still posing some questions. They're still encouraging us through the use of interrogatives to be reflective, to still have an open mind. However, the final question is then followed, that's getting ahead to the blue bit, by a declarative, by an answer. So we could talk about sentence function. We could group sentences together within a closing paragraph and recognize those patterns. Brilliant. Let's look at this next one then. Don't let accents continue to be one of the last acceptable prejudices. So guys, I forgot to highlight in yellow, didn't I? But we've got the full stop, but it begins with this verb, don't. So it's not interrogative, no question mark. It's not exclamatory, no exclamation mark. But we are now being given a sentence that begins with a verb. So it has to be, yes, the imperative. Brilliant. So we've got an imperative sentence. Don't let accents continue to be one of the last acceptable prejudices. So from a comparison point of view, we've got one closing that's using a combination of declaratives and interrogatives. And in contrast, we've immediately got the use of an imperative commanding sentence function at the end of this article. Now, let's have a look at the green then. For the elements in green, can you label the word classes? And can you explain the links? So let's look at our green bits. Our hidden linguistic prejudices. Now, if we were looking at each individual element, okay, our hidden linguistic prejudices. Now, the noun in that sentence is prejudice. Brilliant. Did you get that? It's an abstract noun, prejudice. It's being pre-modified by hidden and linguistic. So we could talk about them as pre-modifiers. We could be more specific. The adjective hidden. We could argue that linguistic prejudices is creating a kind of a noun phrase. So we could say that this is a noun phrase that's made up of the adjective hidden and the linguistic prejudices, so that abstract noun phrase. Now, are. Now, guys, you've always got to put your word classes in context. If that word are was on its own in a list of words, we could be mistaken or more forgiven if we'd mistaken it as a pronoun. Ours can operate like a pronoun, and when we're reading text quickly, that sadly is what we sometimes do. We see something, we label it, we like 50%, 60%, whatever confident. It's got to be a pronoun, right? Because I've learned that ours is a pronoun and I move on. But actually, one of the areas we've got to be careful is sometimes with our labeling, there's like crossover areas. Sometimes verbs can act as nouns. Nouns can act as verbs. Are here is not a pronoun. I'm just going to pause there and you'll be like, what? And why is it a pronoun? Because actually it's acting here like a determiner. It is introducing and specifically introducing this noun phrase using the determiner are to show ownership. Now, this is quite clever because in this moment it's inclusive. The writer is identifying that they themselves also have hidden linguistic prejudices, that they are part of a universal group are linguistic prejudices, which is quite clever because this isn't the writer turning on people and calling them prejudiced. This is the writer of text A recognizing and owning their own prejudices, their own flaws, which is very clever because it stops this piece becoming too dictative or like angry or righteous in its tone. That simple little choice of the determiner are hidden linguistic prejudices, is really saying, I do it too. And that creates inclusivity. That doesn't polarize your reader. That makes them feel included. Okay, so hidden linguistic prejudices. Now, if we were thinking about the meaning at this stage, we've got the adjective hidden. Now, that suggests concealed, something that is concealed, something that is unknown. So what is concealed and unknown? What does everybody have? Everybody has, to some degree, are hidden, concealed, unknown linguistic prejudices. Areas of language where we might be biased or discriminate. Brilliant. So let's look across to the other one, the last acceptable prejudices. So don't let accents continue to be one of the last acceptable prejudices. So guys, we have the determiner here isn't are, but the. So it's a much more pointed use of a determiner, the last acceptable prejudices. So guys, this is about patterning. Now, if we can confidently say that prejudice is an abstract noun, prejudices here has to be an abstract noun. If we've said that the hidden linguistic are pre-modifiers, here our pre-modifiers are last acceptable. And then we can talk about them being adjectives. And what are we really getting here then in terms of meaning? The last acceptable prejudices. Yeah, so in other words, don't let accents be one of the last acceptable prejudices. In other words, that there are some prejudices, some bias that are seen as acceptable. So what does it mean by acceptable? It means that they're allowed, that they are made, we make room for those prejudices and we don't stop them. So we can see links here. So both articles name, because that's what nouns do, nouns name the problem as being a form of prejudice. So both articles present the idea that what is happening around accent and how we're treating people because of the way they speak is a form of prejudice. However, text A is saying it's a hidden prejudice. Some of us are doing it without realizing. And it's a bit of a softer, almost like it's about convicting us. It's making aware of our mistakes without telling us off for them. Whereas the imperative tone of text B, last acceptable prejudices, seems much more direct and a little bit more aggressive in tone. So both name the word or use the word prejudice to name the problem. What's happening with accents is a problem. It's a prejudice. It's a bias. It's unfair. However, one does it in a more inclusive, softer way, hidden linguistic prejudices. The other is much more direct. Brilliant. Now, it just says then, for the elements in blue, can you explain the final image, including labeling? Okay, so we've got a simple declarative, it just doesn't work. Now, this is where you've got to look at sentences in context because that pronoun it, what does that it actually even refer to? It just doesn't work. So it's referring to the idea that changing how we sound will improve our prospects. In other words, changing our accents to get a better job, it's actually saying here it doesn't work. It's answering its own question. Changing your accents doesn't work. Changing the way you speak to please other people doesn't work. So actually, this article comes to a very firm, clear conclusion. It doesn't work. So for all its openness and its persuasive argument of the reader, it does take us to a very clear, definitive conclusion. It just doesn't work. So we've got that simple declarative sentence with the use of the pronoun it, making it really clear that it's referring back to this idea of accents and changing accents. It doesn't work. In contrast then, just shut your face, you tip. Okay, so just shut your face, you tip. We've got a simple sentence. Now we could argue it's imperative because we've got the shut your face, but this little hedge just being used here, almost like in a colloquial spoken way, like this is very much the voice of the writer, actually speaking out of the article to us in a very direct kind of colloquial way. Just shut your face, you tip. They do not mind using that confrontational language, the use of tit here is a slang use of the noun. It's meant to be insulting, but it's done kind of tongue in cheek to be humorous. Okay, so we've got two very different endings. And with the second one, we've got that real clear cyclical link back to our text A. So back to the beginning of text B. So it's a lovely cyclical ending. Now, guys, what we need to do after that warm up for us to move forward this week. Now, I know I said it as a homework before we broke up, and I don't know because we're not meeting each other in person, and I might have forgot to put it on show my homework. This is what I'm going to just give you the rest of the session to have a little think about. Now, we were looking at these tables. Now, it says here we've got text A and text B. What I've added in at the bottom here for the closing that you wouldn't have seen in class is that we can talk about the closing using all of that linguistic warm-up we've just done. Okay, so we can say that text A is a final declarative, it's a clear statement of opinion, it doesn't work. It clearly challenging the idea of changing how we speak to get ahead. It condemns the idea of promoting change as a form of prejudice. Okay, text B offers a clear cyclical link. The writer's using the repetition of phrasing and the imperative function to strongly condemn and call out prejudice. So we've got something for each of those, the closing sentences. Then over here in the similar or different, we've got both writers agree that it is a form of prejudice to discriminate based on accent. However, text A offers a balanced argument, still allowing for choice, while text B maintains the highly personal argument. So guys, you're going to have time to make sure your table is complete. Now, for the next bit, the presentation of views, I just wanted to show you some of the examples that I would have drawn on. Now, at this stage, I haven't done any labeling here. I've literally lifted out the two texts, 3 sentences from text A, 3 sentences from text B. This is to support you if you haven't done it. Now, you can see actually I'm putting the work on you because really it should have been done. If you've not chosen sentences, or if you've chosen sentences and you've completed this, I will take you in a slightly different direction in a minute, okay? But you can see text A, in fact, all dialects and accents are linguistically valid. So in that box, we need some AL1 labeling. You might talk about sentence function, type, word classes. But when we examine the reasons why anyone would consider changing their accent, we uncover a raft of biases that shouldn't necessarily be reinforced. Again, I'm going to ask you to label and talk about that one at the level of what it might mean. So again, into your box on your big A3 sheet, you're going to be recording these sentences if you haven't done it already, and label and make notes. Without even realizing we can make this to discriminate. So we can use this to discriminate. This can make it hard for marginalized and minority speakers to find a job, gain an education, or even find a home. So what I'm going to ask you to do in a minute is to pause, okay, and to complete this table. Now, there's nothing in your similar or different box, and there's nothing in the conclusion boxes. Those are for you to do in this next session. Now, what I would say is if you're coming at this and you've done the table, I would just ask you to take a slightly different focus. I would ask you to use these sentences as lifted from the text to practice your linguistic labeling. Okay, for each of the sentences, I know you might not have room in your table, but if you just write them out onto a piece of paper and look at how you would label from an AO1 perspective, but also in terms of AO3, what view is being offered here? Is it a view that is promoting, condemning, criticizing, arguing for or against something? Okay, and we're going to use those as our starting point with our writing when we're next together. Okay, guys, so thank you for listening, and I'll speak to you in our next lesson.